My favourite politicians is Liberal Democrat Senator David Leyonhjelm, and I thought we'd get him on the line to give us the impartial crossbench view of how the Turnbull government is travelling, as well as some of his typically wonderfully politically incorrect views about all sorts of issues such as the Qantas language police. Thanks for joining me, David. Hi.
Hello, Miranda.
Now, you are one of my favourites because you actually don't seem to be afraid to speak your mind and say it how it is. So you're there sitting on the crossbench. You have a pretty good eagle's eye view of how both Labor and the Coalition are doing. So first up, how are the Turnbull government going?
Well, it's not my job to carry a torch for them, but I have to feel a little sympathy for them. They can't take a trick. They've ended the year with some victories from their point of view. There's a Bennelong by-election, and the same-sex marriage plebiscite turned out to be relatively peaceful. Nobody died, and the sky was still up there. A few other little things as well. And then came Barnaby. And all of a sudden, instead of talking about things that we ought to be talking about, taxes and spending and the company tax issue, which I think for once the government really has got right, this drive to reduce company tax. We're talking about a politician's sex life, and it's very unseemly, and no wonder people think politicians are hopeless.
Now, we saw in the news poll out on Monday that obviously the government's still not winning the polls against Labor, but we also saw quite a decline in something that had been quite stable for some time, and that is Malcolm Turnbull's personal approval rating. So do you think that he was being blamed for the Barnaby Joyce fiasco?
Well, I never heard much criticism of Malcolm until he criticised Barnaby and criticised his behaviour. I can't remember his exact words now, but criticised his behaviour and then brought in the bonking ban. And actually, I don't think the criticisms of Barnaby were really the issue. I think it was the bonking ban that really set people off. All of a sudden, people started saying, oh, now this is getting really ridiculous, really is stupid. Yes, it's a bad idea for people in senior positions to sleep with their staff. We all know that. It's true for business and politics and everywhere. But honestly, a ban on it, it's that's going too far. And I think at that point, certainly from the perspective of the feedback I was getting, that's when I think Malcolm's numbers probably went against him a little bit.
But do you think that characterisation was fair? Because it's really just his ministerial guidelines, and all sorts of nanny state-ish things are in there, but they're not really bans or demands or edicts. They're just guidelines, I guess, that allow a Prime Minister in a situation like that to actually say to someone like Barnaby Joyce, listen, you've broken the rules, you have to fall on your sword. Whereas the way it was going, Barnaby just was going to keep on keeping on.
Yes, you're right. I did try to make that point a couple of times to people that these were just guidelines, and the next Prime Minister, whoever it is, could change them, and they don't apply to anybody except ministers. And if you want to be a minister, you know that they're there before you even accept the job. So I agree with you entirely that their significance has been seriously overstated, but it really, it has been overstated by an awful lot of people, and I frankly don't think they're very well understood amongst the general public. There is this perception that the Ministerial Code of Conduct is some sort of ironclad rules, and there's no getting around them, and they don't. Somehow or other they're legislated or something equivalent to that.
So that sort of brings me to another question about, it also fed into the Michaelia Cash hysteria last week. Do you think that there's a sort of an internal mischievous sort of ploy by conservative commentators, particularly who are loyal to Tony Abbott and want to see him back in his throne? Do you think that there's this sort of constant, it's not outright attacks on Malcolm Turnbull, but more a deliberate reframing of situations to make them appear really bad from conservatives' points of view?
I sometimes wonder about that. There is a perception there was an attempt by some people to find something negative in everything. I remember when the American President Trump decided that he wasn't going to participate in the TPP. And after that, Steve Chobo and Turnbull told the media, well, we will try to keep it going with 11 participants. And, the scoffing came more from the people on Malcolm's side of politics who don't like Malcolm. They're probably supporters of Tony Abbott or anyone in the Liberal Party but Turnbull, I suspect. The scoffing was louder from them than from the opposition, the Labor opposition. And yet now we hear the TPP is being put back together again without America in it, as they said they would try to do. And yet, the criticisms from those same quarters keep coming. So I don't know that there is any plan. I don't think there's any strategy to pull Malcolm down, but there's certainly a fair amount of gloating when he stumbles. And, you have to say, in fairness, the guy does stumble regularly, but certainly there's no attempt to help him out on the part of some people on his own side.
And I guess that's just what you would expect. That's part of the transactional cost of removing a first-term,
yes,
popularly elected Prime Minister and replacing him. And we saw that with Labor.
We did. You're exactly right. I don't think it's avoidable. If you replace a first-term Prime Minister his main sin was that he was behind in the polls, there's going to be a bad taste in a lot of mouths as a result of that. We saw it with Rudd and Gillard as well. And it didn't do Labor any good, and you would think it wouldn't do the Liberals any good either.
Mm. Although, Malcolm Turnbull made a mistake by using the polls as the single metric for explaining why he was getting rid of, or why the party room was ousting Tony Abbott, but there were a lot of other reasons at the time.
Yes, that's right. But you know what? I agree. And there are quite a number of people who've said to me, in the time after Malcolm replaced Tony as Prime Minister, we would have lost. The simple fact is we would have lost. That's where we were heading, and there was no plan to turn it around. Now, who knows? Some people have said, well, yes, we were behind in the polls. We could have turned it around in a campaign, and others said, no, we were doomed, and so be it.
Well, that's right, but if they were doomed then they're doomed now, so you can't really have it both ways.
I totally agree. I totally agree. The biggest mistake Malcolm probably made was not going to an election shortly after he took over the job. I think that probably did him a lot of harm.
Yeah. Now, what about, do you think that they have any chance of winning the next election? And do you think that Malcolm Turnbull will continue on as Prime Minister?
Yes, I do. I think Malcolm will remain as Prime Minister. I think it's a possibility that when he gets to 30 news polls, if they continue to be negative, he might say to the party room, "Okay, I'm going to declare the leadership open, and let's have a poll." I wouldn't be at all surprised if he did that.
Has he hinted that to you?
No, nothing at all. So I'm just speculating.
But that would be a good idea.
Yeah, so that would get over this issue of the 30 polls in a row that he mentioned when he took over from Abbott. But I don't think there'd be any challenges. I don't think anyone would beat him. So yes, I think he'll go to the next election as Prime Minister. Will he turn it around? If he runs it like the last campaign, no, he won't. He will lose. And Labor is absolutely confident about winning. They're just counting the sorts of things they will do, and all sorts of things going on based on the assumption that they will win the next election. So they're supremely confident that it's in the bag. I don't think it is in the bag for them, but
that's dangerous.
It has the risk that they will believe their own propaganda too much and that they will lose it. But I think it is theirs to lose, quite frankly. But they have a history of being quite capable of losing, and just as the Liberals do. So who knows? I hope that if Malcolm wants to win, he sets out to win, that he will not believe his own or take his own advice, that he will actually take better quality advice than he did last time.
And David Leyonhjelm, do they talk to you? Do they massage you and try to give you what you want, or are they like they used to be and just ignore the crossbench?
It's variable, depends on the minister. I have to say they're mostly hospitable. They are, because quite a number of the Liberals are on side with me in terms of small L liberalism, classical liberalism. So they're into low taxes and less government spending and balancing the budget and all those good financial things. And then there's quite a few of them that are also say, well, there are some things the government shouldn't intrude into. They are personal matters. I have to say, there's quite a lot of them have that view about the Barnaby Joyce issue, which I do too, and so there's quite a few people who agree with me on, if not everything, then most things. So they're generally pretty affable. Whether they talk to me about what their legislative agenda is very variable. Some of them are great, and they come and talk to me at
who? Matthias Cormann?
Yeah, Matthias is excellent. He'll talk to me. He's very good. Michaelia Cash is also extremely good at dealing with me in particular, and I think the rest of the crossbench. The ones in the House are often not as good, but Alan Tudge, for example, he's good at staying in touch. So just because they're in the House doesn't mean they can't be good with the crossbench, but on balance, the ministers in the Senate are a lot better.
Mm-hmm.